Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Vigilante, City Lights, Prairie Justice number 1 from 1995 in DC Comics. Although many characters have carried the name Vigilante over the years, the first to do so was Greg Sanders, first appearing in issue 42 of Action Comics all the way back in 1941. Created by Mort Weisinger and Mort Meskin, the original Vigilante came with about the simplest high concept a superhero character could have. He's a cowboy from a long line of lawmen, complete with 6 shooters and a lasso. A world away from later incarnations of the character, such as Adrian Chase's neurotic mass murderer, a member in good standing of the All-Star Squadron, as well as the original incarnation of the Seven Soldiers of Victory. Now, in a vacuum, if you heard that James Robinson wrote a series with the original Vigilante in 1995, you might be expecting something more along the lines of Starman, reverent if a little stiff at time from all the under-the-hood continuity work required to square Golden Age stories of the post-crisis era. City Lights, Prairie Justice is something else entirely, by which I mean it's a star vehicle for a very special artist, by name of Tony Salmons. Salmons has been mentioned before on this channel once or twice, and with good reason. Of all the great artists of his era, his name remains one of the least celebrated. Partly that's down to a reputation for difficulty, from all reports not completely unearned, but a larger part owing to the fact that he left comics almost entirely in the late 80s, with only a handful of credits to his name for subsequent decades. He left comics for Hollywood, which is where you're most likely to have come across his work, behind the scenes for some of the most influential animation of the 90s, shows like Aeon Flux and Batman the Animated Series. The present series represents his last and longest sustained work in the medium. Not his final credit, but everything after this is short stories and pinups. So, what's the series actually about? We're back in the Golden Age, with Greg Sanders supposedly having hung up his irons to ease into a career as a singing cowboy on screen in the 1940s. Of course, it's never so clean as all that. His old sidekick Stuff falls in love with a girl with a past who gets dragged into the underworld of organized crime, and Sanders once again goes to work as the mysterious vigilante. At the center of all the corruption lies one of the great villains in American history, no less a mastermind than Bugsy Siegel himself, setting the stage for a Hollywood showdown between cowboys and gangsters. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Vigilante, City Lights, Prairie Justice number 2 from 1995 in DC Comics. The Vigilante's war on organized crime continues. With the death of his erstwhile sidekick Stuff, the cowboy hero tears a swath across Bugsy Siegel's rackets. At this time, of course, the real Siegel was preoccupied with building Las Vegas. The last thing he needed was a superhero busting up every money-making venture in Southern California. The real attraction here remains Tony Salmon's art. Absolutely breathtaking stuff by any measure. Purely expressionistic in effect, his incline swells and rushes with the flexibility of a pencil. In close-up detail, there are traces in his mature style of Klaus Janson, and definitely Jose Munoz. From Munoz, he also takes a magisterial understanding of black and white balance across his pages. Frankly, the book could have been printed in black and white and lost absolutely nothing in the impact. Although, that's no slight against the colorist. Mark Chiarello was an art director at DC for almost 3 decades, with a list of credits as long as your arm. He was the first colorist for Hellboy, for instance, and a significant cartooning talent in his own right. Just take a look at these covers by Chiarello, for example. The color work here is frankly stunning. Like I say, the story could have stood on its own without any color, but with Chiarello's color, the result is a revelation. It's the next step for when pioneers like Tatiana Wood and Julia Lacquemont were able to build with the early Baxter paper books, color almost completely unmoored from representation. The opening spread of A Night Out at a Jazz Club is entirely colored in shades of blue. Not a single deviation, just heavy spotted blacks and deep blues to convey the barely contained chaos of a busy dance floor in a jazz club in Watts in 1942. Of course, it all gets busted up when the vigilante rolls through while breaking up the area drug trade. Using a real-world archvillain like Bugsy Siegel is an interesting choice for the series. For all that he was a real human being, Siegel was very much a supervillain, down to his essential character traits and weaknesses. Saunders knows Siegel can be goaded into acting recklessly, which is a famously true fact. Bugsy Siegel was a brilliant man with a ruinous temper, a massive self-destructive streak, and absolutely no compunctions about sanctioning murder on an industrial scale when he believed it in his interest. Sanders' crusade sparks an unrelated gang war for control of L.A., and all Sanders has to do is put up his spurs for a while as the gangsters cook each other. Of course, Siegel's a perfect match for Sanders, but he's also smart enough to bring in outside help in the form of the Dummy, the vigilante's actual archenemy from the 1940s, a small man with the look of Charlie McCarthy and a homicidal attitude to match. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Vigilante City Lights Prairie Justice number 3 from 1995 in DC Comics. Last issue ended on quite a cliffhanger with the Vigilante blown sky high by his old nemesis, the Dummy, shipped out to Los Angeles by Bugsy Siegel. If you're wondering just how our boy survived that rather large explosion, good question. We pick up about a year later with Saunders relocated to a ranch in rural Nevada to convalesce and build his strength back following what we are told are rather perilous injuries. On the horizon, however, he can see Bugsy Siegel's Las Vegas rising up from the sand. Of course, if you know your history, you know that building Vegas destroyed Siegel, ultimately leading to his eventual demise, almost certainly at the hands of people to whom he owed a lot of money, but there are enough suspects that the question remains open. As Saunders reflects throughout the issue, he doesn't know whether or not he'll be able to get to Siegel before the consequences of Siegel's own actions. But for the moment, he's left to sit and wait, spending his time on the men breaking wild horses and collecting intelligence. If you know the story of Las Vegas, then some of the beats are familiar. Siegel's endless back and forth with contractors, with celebrity guests, with every quotidian detail that follows building a real hotel in the middle of nowhere. We get to see Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky convening to measure out the remainder of Siegel's days as if they were the fates themselves. We even get to see the machinations of the various malls, growing stir-crazy, being kept as prize trophies in gilded cages. Through it all, the vigilante waits and watches, searching for the opening to allow him to crack the outfit in half. He finds it in the form of one of Siegel's lieutenants on a rampage after finding his girl in bed with a local ranch hand. A show of force interrupted by the sudden arrival of a familiar cowboy riding a horse and leading a car full of gangsters to their demise off a short cliff. The great Blevins stops by as well to provide 2 pages for the middle of the book. Perhaps it was a matter of deadlines, but Blevins does a remarkable job drawing enough like the inimitable Salmons that you might not even notice until you go back and glance at the credits. You don't really feel any kind of crunch for Salmon's part, at least. Every page he draws remains stunning, every swatch of color by Chiarello a feast for the senses. The next issue promises a race against time, with the vigilante up against every gangster in the country for the honor of putting a bullet in Bugsy Siegel. Howdy, folks. Today we're looking at Vigilante City Lights Prairie Justice number 4 from 1995 in DC Comics. Greg Saunders' war with Bugsy Siegel comes crashing to its inevitable conclusion as Siegel retreats to Hollywood. Siegel died on June 20th, 1947, murdered in Beverly Hills, California. This after the notable early failure of the Flamingo and well before Las Vegas took off. It's one of the great sagas in American history, one of our most famous cities, founded by one of our most famous criminals. And Siegel cut low in the prime of his life because for a gangster he proved remarkably bad with money. Here's where you might want to throw in a joke about contractors being the real bandits. Close enough to the truth here. Once in Hollywood, Siegel has to deal with roaming gangs of assassins, including one particularly brazen group led by Siegel's former associate, the Dummy, who lay siege to a movie studio before being sent packing by the vigilante himself. It's here we see the Dummy meet his demise, falling from the rafters and crashing into a spotlight. A bad way to die for anyone but a cold-blooded killer. After the mess at the studio, Saunders tricks Siegel into his home and finds the gangster whiling away the hours, building elaborate playing card houses while he waits for the murder he knows is coming to him. It's here Siegel and Saunders finally catch up, with Siegel learning the reason why this masked vigilante has been a thorn in his side these 2 years gone. Seemingly inexplicable. Of course, Siegel doesn't seem to even remember killing Saunders' sidekick or his sidekick's fiancée. That makes as much sense as anything, given Siegel's reputation. Of course, being a delusional narcissist right up to the end, what Siegel really wants is to die with dignity and grandeur, so he enlists Saunders to do the deed, a hero with character to pull the trigger as opposed to some anonymous skell. Does Saunders give the man what he wants? Tony Salmon's last great comics work comes to a close with a glance at the cold breath of the tomb. The vigilante's adventure here is nothing less than a slice of American history given life in vivid detail. Brett Blevins again shows up for a few pages and again does a remarkable job in blending into the finished product. Ultimately, it's a reminder of what we lost when Salmons decamped from the industry. A true expressive visionary and one of the most skilled draftsmen to ever sling a pencil. And thanks to James Robinson for turning in such a gracefully dry script. If ever there was a series primed for rediscovery by an appreciative cult, it's this.